If you're watching this, you've probably seen my recent debate with James White and Jeff Durbin of Apologia Studios. After seeing them post content about my TikTok for over a few weeks, I decided to reach out on Instagram about a week ago and say, hey, instead of talking about me, instead of talking past me, why don't you talk to me? And to my surprise, Jeff Durbin reached out and invited me to come on the show and to talk with him and James White and discuss the areas that we disagree. Now, in our email exchange before the show was recorded, everybody was very cordial. It was made to sound like this was going to be a very respectful conversation about our disagreements. And when I showed up to do the debate on Tuesday, it started off that way. Before we hit recording, and even in the first few minutes of recording, James White was completely quiet, and Jeff Durbin was generally respectful, asking me to share my perspective. And then very quickly, unsurprisingly, the debate turned into a rhetorical match. James and Jeff are apologists, which is a very narrow section of Christian theological teaching that is meant to help folks defend the faith against other beliefs. And part of being a good apologist is being a good debater. And Jeff and James are great debaters. They know how to use words and rhetoric. They know how to throw out questions to get people riled up, to get people off their game, to confuse people. And I think anybody who watches the interview will see that over the hour that we discussed theology with one another, the two of them just kept going at me, throwing in different perspectives. And oftentimes when I tried to respond, I was spoken over, or you can't actually hear my responses. I'm not saying that I feel like everything was unfair, but I do feel like the debate did not give me the opportunity to clearly articulate some of the key differences between my progressive Christian perspective and their fundamentalist Christian perspective, which is what I want to do in the series of videos that I'm posting now. So over the course of the next few videos, I want to give you some more well thought out answers to some of the objections that James and Jeff raised during the debate that I either didn't articulate clearly or didn't feel like I had enough time or space to articulate. So with that said, let's dive in.
Oh, the consistent testimony.
Research into the ancient Greco-Roman world. And
Son, I was studying this stuff when you were still in diapers. Don't give me your 10-year stuff.
Okay. Listen, okay, this is the arrogance that you're just known for.
No, you were the one that brought it in there, Brandon. You brought in your 10 years. You brought in 10 years of experience.
You're the one claiming things, Brandon.
Brandon, you said I have 10 years of experience. I spent $100,000. Pastor James was simply responding to that. You brought it up, and you said you are making an argument from authority. I've spent 10 years doing this and $100,000. That's an argument. That's an argument from authority.
Another area of contention in my debate with Jeff Durbin and James White came when I made a frustrated and impassioned claim during the debate. I said, I've spent almost a decade, have $100,000 in student loans, getting 3 degrees focused on this topic of sexuality in the Bible. I obviously agreed that this appeal to authority is not a strong point to justify my argument, but let me tell you why I felt the need to make this claim in the first place. First, nowhere in the introduction to the debate did James or Jeff properly introduce me to their audience. In fact, if you look in the show notes, I'm only spoken of as a gay theologian and a reverend in scare quotes, and they point to me as a TikTok personality. I believe this is intentional. This was a way for them to make me appear as some novice, sitting in his bedroom spewing off uninformed takes of the Bible. But that's not the case. I have devoted the last 15 years to studying and teaching the Bible in both ministry and academic contexts. I've lectured at Oxford University on this topic. I've taught courses at San Francisco Theological Seminary and at the Disciples Seminary Foundation. I've also pastored a local church. I professionally published 9 books, a majority of which are deep dives from a biblical perspective into the topic of inclusion. I have a degree in the Bible from one of the most well-known evangelical Bible colleges, a master's of theological studies focusing on sexuality and gender in the biblical world, and am pursuing a PhD in biblical studies focused on sexuality and gender in the Bible. I say this not to boast in my studies or to show off my accomplishments, but to make the case that it's disingenuous for folks like James and Jeff to write me off as some uninformed social media personality rather than someone who has invested time, money, and a great deal of effort in studying these topics so that I can get them right. You can disagree with me. You can say my theology or my scholarship is wrong, but you cannot say that I have not done the work to engage this topic with care. Unfortunately, my experience as a queer theologian is that straight evangelical theologians often write us off and disregard us as non-serious, similar to the way that they treat women and other minorities in the field. So I believe it's important to stand up not only for myself, but for many other queer theologians, scholars, and ministers who are seriously doing the work and who are frankly more qualified to speak on these topics than James or Jeff. Which also brings me to the topic of their credentials. Despite being skilled debaters and apologists for their version of faith, neither Jeff nor James come close to being serious scholars on this topic or any topic. Neither Jeff or James are taken seriously as scholars within the broad evangelical tradition, not because they are some faithful remnant holding on to the truth that everyone else has departed from, but because their arguments are bad and their knowledge is lacking. Dr. James White is not a doctor. He holds a Doctor of Ministry degree, which is a non-academic or scholarly degree, from an unaccredited so-called university. What this means is that his degree, first and foremost, did not prepare him to engage in a scholarly way with the Bible, and his skills were never tested in any universally recognized way to confer on him the title of doctor, which signifies someone who has completed this work and has competency in their field of study. Jeff, as far as I can tell, has never been trained to study or teach the Bible in any academic setting, which would disqualify him from even ordination in the most basic of Christian denominations. I say this not to assert that these men are not intelligent, or to say that everybody who speaks on or teaches the Bible needs a string of academic degrees. I say this to demonstrate, however, that it's clear that these men have not done enough study on the topic of sexuality in the biblical world. And I want to point out that they are not experts. And to say that just because you've mastered your rhetorical skills does not mean that you're actually a credible theologian, teacher, or scholar. These men often posture as scholars, but they are not. And as James mentioned at the end of the debate, his views are a minority within the broader community of biblical scholarship, which again is not a reflection of him being part of the faithful remnant who holds on to the truth, but rather a demonstration that many of his so-called facts on these topics are simply wrong and are not held by those who have devoted themselves to becoming experts on these topics. This is why all Christians should be weary of anyone who appear on the internet or in churches claiming to be experts who have not actually done the work, who have not been tested and affirmed by other professionals or scholars in the field. That's how deception and damaging doctrines are promoted. At the end of the day, my goal was not to win a debate with rhetorical skills, but to present my honest assessments of the truth. And contrary to what James and Jeff espouse, this seems to be the exact opposite of their intention in engagement with me.